And so Tracy with the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit is the Youth Engagement Advisor in the smoke-free program at the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. She has also been working with youth and young adults to address issues such as alcohol, tobacco, and vaping prevention for over 10 years, and is one of the contributors to the creation of the nonexperiment.ca website. It's based on health promotion initiative designed to support education partners in teaching students through grades 7 to 8 about vaping. So Tracy, I welcome you to the virtual Speak Your Mind. Having said that, I'm going to mute my mic now and hand it over to you. And I'm also going to turn my camera off, but I'm still here if you need assistance and to take on those questions and answers for you.
Great. You're going to pull up my presentation for us. So hello, everyone. As Jody said, my name is Tracy, and I'm with the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. So today I've been asked to speak to you about some of the issues around vaping. So I'm going to present some information that I think is important for people to know. But if you do have questions or if there's something that I haven't touched on, I do encourage you, as Jody said, to put those questions in the chat box, and I will hopefully be able to answer them for you at the end of the presentation or the end of the conference. I also want to just make a note to say that throughout this presentation, I will be making reference to tobacco and tobacco products. Please understand that for the purpose of this presentation, when I say tobacco, I'm referring to commercial tobacco products that are made and sold by the tobacco industry, and that I'm not referring to traditional or sacred tobacco. Next slide, please. So I'm going to assume that most people in the audience know what an e-cigarette is, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But essentially what they are battery-operated devices that heat a liquid, otherwise known as e-liquid, until it vaporizes into an aerosol. They come in many shapes and sizes, from box-like devices to small flat sticks that look like little USB drives. They all contain the same basic components, which is a mouthpiece, a tank, or a cartridge/pod, depending on the type of device, where the vaping liquid goes, a heating element, and a battery. Next slide, please. The actual act of vaping involves inhaling and exhaling the aerosol that is produced by the vaping device. So the heating element in the e-cigarette heats up the e-liquid to the point at which it turns into an aerosol. Now, a lot of people think that that aerosol is just like a harmless water vapor, but it isn't. It's actually a suspension, which is kind of like a mixture that contains many fine little tiny particles that you're inhaling deep into your lungs. And once you've inhaled them deep into your lungs, that allows those tiny little fine particles to pass into your bloodstream. Once absorbed into your bloodstream, those particles are free to travel throughout your body, and that includes your brain. The remaining aerosol is then exhaled back out into the air and appears as that, white smoke or cloud that sometimes it gets called. Next slide, please. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to ask just a couple of little true-false questions. Obviously, we can't do a show of hands or anything to indicate your answer, but you can just ask yourself these questions, and we'll take them up as we go. So my first question for you to ask yourself is true or false? Most e-liquids contain nicotine. You just want to click, Jody. So the answer is true. Nicotine is that addictive drug that's found in some e-liquid, and while it is possible to buy e-liquid without nicotine in it, the fact is that most e-liquid has nicotine. And often that nicotine is in much higher concentrations than what is found in traditional cigarettes. And because of that, it makes vaping extremely addictive. Next slide, please. Because of the extremely high levels of nicotine that are possible in e-liquid, nicotine addiction is actually one of the single biggest concerns that we have with young people in vaping. Addiction to nicotine happens very quickly, and it is an extremely powerful addiction. Once you're addicted, it is extremely hard to quit. Oh, just go forward one. There you go. Um, Wanting to quit a nicotine addiction is not a problem that you want to have. It is an extremely difficult addiction to stop. On top of the addiction factor, a young person's brain will continue to develop until you're well into your 20s. And because of that continued development, a teenager's brain is actually more susceptible or more easily addicted to nicotine with less amounts of nicotine needed compared to an adult brain. So the younger your brain is, the easier it is to get addicted to nicotine. Nicotine can also change how your brain develops. It physically changes brain development, and it can affect things like your memory, concentration. It can reduce your impulse control, and it can sometimes even lead to experiencing behavioral problems. On top of that, research is showing that young people who vape may be more likely to switch to cigarettes once addicted to nicotine. So we're talking about young people that have maybe already made the decision to never smoke a cigarette, but try to experiment with vaping because they feel it's a safer option. What they're finding is that people that are doing that are more likely to switch to smoking cigarettes once the addiction to nicotine takes hold. Becoming addicted to nicotine at an early age is also associated with a more greater chance of developing other addictions to other drugs. Next slide, please. So nicotine isn't just a drug, it's also considered a poison. And nicotine poisoning is a newer concern that has emerged with vaping that isn't often seen with cigarette smoking. So as I mentioned before, e-liquid can contain very high levels of nicotine, and the design of a vaping device allows a person to take frequent and constant hits. The combination of the high levels of nicotine plus that frequent ability to vape in frequent sessions has actually led to an increased amount of nicotine poisoning. So young people in Simcoe County and Muskoka are showing up in ERs suffering from nicotine poisoning. The symptoms of nicotine poisoning include headaches, dizziness, vomiting, tremors, and if, in severe cases and left untreated, it can also lead to a loss of consciousness and even death if it's not treated. On top of that, e-liquid has a very sweet smell and taste. So this in combination with the bright, whimsical bottle labels can make a bottle of e-liquid very appealing to an unsuspecting, young child. So as a result, there's actually been incidences of very young children getting nicotine poisoning after drinking e-liquid because they don't understand what it is. So it's really important if you are using e-cigarettes to make sure that your e-liquid is staying out of the reach of young children and even pets. It can be very attractive to a pet as well. Finally, I just wanted to point out that nicotine can be absorbed through the skin as well. So just by touching it. And, in extreme cases, that can also lead to an overdose. This happens most often when people are trying to refill their own pods or cartridges and they accidentally spill it on themselves. So just be mindful that even just touching e-liquid, the nicotine can be absorbed through your skin. Next slide, please. So aside from nicotine, there are 3 other main ingredients in e-liquid. The first one is vegetable glycerin, otherwise known as VG. This is a syrupy sweet liquid. It's often used to moisten food and cosmetic products. In e-liquid, it helps to suspend the flavoring and nicotine particles. So instead of those things just settling at the bottom of the e-liquid, it helps to suspend them throughout the e-liquid. It's considered safe to eat in small quantities, but it has not been proven safe to inhale when vaping. It's really important that everybody understands that eating something and inhaling something are very, very different things. So safe to eat does not in any way mean that it's also safe to inhale. The second ingredient is propylene glycol, or PG. It is a colorless, odorless liquid that is also used in food products as a preservative or as a thickener. You can also find PG in industrial products like antifreeze and paint, but its main function in e-liquid is to produce that sort of white cloud that mimics cigarette smoke when a person exhales. So just like vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol is considered safe to eat in small quantities, but it has not been proven safe to inhale when you are vaping. And so the third ingredient, other than nicotine, that's found in e-liquid is, of course, the chemical flavorings. And as I'm sure most of you know, e-liquids come in thousands of flavors. And despite the ads and the labels that show the pictures of delicious fruit or candy, all e-cigarette flavors are made from chemicals. And again, these chemicals are generally safe to eat when you're eating them in small quantities, but none of them have been proven safe to inhale. So next slide, please. So I have another question for you. This one is true or false? Vaping is safe. You just take a second and think about it to yourself, what you think your answer might be. And then Jody, you can click again. So the answer to this is false. Just because these products, e-cigarette products, are legally for sale and available on the market, it does not mean that they are safe or risk-free. And it certainly doesn't mean that we fully understand what the effects of using these products will be to somebody. Next slide, please. So what are some of the health effects of vaping? Well, let me start by saying that e-cigarettes are a very relatively new product on the market. So it is going to take time to fully understand what all the health effects are from using these products. As I said before, just because they're available for sale does not mean that they're good for you or that they can't cause health problems. Researchers are busy trying to study the health effects, and there are a few things that we do now know, but there is still a lot left to discover. We now know that when heated, propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, which remember are those two of the main ingredients in e-liquid, can produce chemicals just in that heating process. Chemical byproducts are produced, and one of them is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is also found in cigarette smoke, and it is known to cause cancer. It's a carcinogen. We know that exposure to nicotine and other chemicals in e-liquid can actually damage lung tissue. And we're starting to understand that that damage is similar to damage caused by cigarette smoking. So again, this is a relatively new discovery. We don't know all the details yet, but they are starting to make the connection that vaping can cause lung damage. We're also starting to understand that people who use e-cigarettes have a greater chance of developing heart disease. Again, I don't know all the specifics of that. It is new research, but as many people know, heart disease is also one of the serious effects that can come from smoking cigarettes. We know that the aerosol made by an e-cigarette from heating that e-liquid contains very small particles and chemicals. And we know that those particles and chemicals do not belong in our lungs or our bodies for that fact. Those particles have been known to worsen lung conditions like asthma and can make it harder to breathe. The aerosol vapor can also cause ear, eye, and throat irritation. Next slide, please. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, a few years ago in the media, there was a lot of attention being played to youth in the US that had been showing up in ERs, and actually there was hundreds of reported cases in the US and even some deaths by young people, youth, from something they were calling a severe lung disease, and it was associated with vaping and e-cigarette products. The first Canadian case of this severe lung disease was reported in Ontario in September of 2019. So as research continues to further discover the health effects of vaping, it's important that everybody remember this. The only way that we're going to fully understand what the health effects of vaping are is to study the people who are vaping. So just like cigarettes, it could take decades to fully understand what all of those health effects are and what these products can do to our bodies. People who are choosing to vape are choosing to be part of that experiment. Next slide, please. So one last question. Is vaping safer than smoking cigarettes? And you can just click whenever you're ready, Jody. We get asked this a lot. Is vaping safer than cigarettes? And it's not an easy answer. It's actually kind of complicated. Next slide, please. When you're just looking at the list of ingredients, e-cigarettes do appear to be less harmful than traditional cigarettes. But it's really important to realize that safer than cigarettes does not mean safe. Cigarettes are going to kill 50% of all of the people who use them. So to say that something is safer than a cigarette is not an endorsement for safety. And this is especially true for someone who has never smoked. What we do know is that our lungs were not designed to inhale anything but air. And therefore, for people who do not use cigarettes, who are not addicted to traditional tobacco cigarettes, vaping is not a safe or healthy addiction to start. Next slide, please. So talk about vaping really wouldn't be complete unless we also talk about the industry that makes and sells and profits from these products. Right now, cigarette smoking rates in Canada are among the lowest they've been in almost 20 years. And that is great news, especially, well, for people like me who work in tobacco control, but it's great news because it means that less people are getting sick and dying from cigarette smoking. However, the one group of people that this isn't great for is the people who make and sell commercial cigarettes, the tobacco industry, because it means for them, their profits are dropping and they're losing money. So the tobacco industry was really in a position where they needed to reinvent themselves. And e-cigarettes were a perfect product for many reasons. People love electronic devices. We are a tech-driven society. Everybody loves their technology. E-cigarettes have that technology built right in. E-cigarettes remove the need to burn tobacco. And this means that they can be marketed as a quote unquote, and I use that quote unquote very hardly, as an alternative, a safer alternative to cigarettes. E-liquid for e-cigarettes comes in thousands of flavors. So that makes them very appealing to users of all ages, and I would argue especially young people. Initially, when e-cigarettes first came out on the market, they were not restricted by laws the same way that cigarettes are. So they're not restricted by laws that oversee the sales and marketing of cigarettes, and they're not restricted in terms of where you can and cannot use them, or they were not dictated. They were not told where you could and cannot use them. So finally, e-cigarettes allowed the tobacco industry to keep their profits going up by doing the one thing that they have spent decades perfecting, and that's addicting people to nicotine. That's what they're in the business of doing, and e-cigarettes allowed them to continue doing that. So even though the tobacco industry didn't invent e-cigarettes, it really didn't take long for them to start buying portions of e-cigarette companies like Juul, which was a major e-cigarette manufacturer, now partly owned by the tobacco industry. And the tobacco industry itself started making and selling their own brand of e-cigarettes. So if you've heard of Logic or Vape, those are e-cigarettes made by the tobacco industry. Next slide, please. So you may ask, so what's the big deal if big tobacco is now involved in the vape industry? Well, the problem is that big tobacco, or the tobacco industry, has a very well documented history of lying about their products' addictiveness, their health effects, and who exactly they're marketing their products to. which, as a spoiler alert, is often young people and other vulnerable populations that they feel they can manipulate. So the tobacco industry spent decades marketing and selling tobacco cigarettes by paying billions of dollars on questionable marketing techniques. They used to pay, and still do at times, they used to do celebrity endorsements. So they pay celebrities to smoke in public or in movies or in other forms of media. They used cartoon characters. Cartoon characters make it really hard to believe that cigarettes are bad or harmful for you when they're being endorsed by this cute and friendly looking little character. Flavors. Cigarettes used to be sold in many different fruit and candy flavors that were attractive to young people. Medical endorsements. The tobacco company used to pay doctors to say that their cigarette brands were good for people, that they were smoother on the throat. You took less of a hit on your throat. They were less irritating. They would even pay doctors to smoke in their advertisements for them. They used lifestyle advertising. So they would show people living different lifestyles while smoking cigarettes to make it look like smoking cigarettes was just part of life. Product placements. They used to pay they still do pay movie companies to put particular brands of cigarettes in movies or in print media. They work with social media influencers to, use products in their videos and rate products in their videos in exchange for free product. The tobacco industry also looks for loopholes in the law. So when new laws do come out that restrict the sales or marketing of the products, they look for ways to get around those loopholes so that they continue doing what they want to do. And those strategies over decades were successful at addicting generations of people to commercial tobacco products, especially cigarettes. So with big tobacco now involved with e-cigarettes, it's really difficult to believe them when they say things like e-cigarettes are safe, or that the thousands of e-cigarette flavors aren't meant to appeal to young people, or that they don't advertise to young people. Their entire business model has been built on trying to convince people to use the products that they know are harmful, just so that they can make money. And we've seen commercial tobacco advertising history repeating itself with e-cigarette advertising. Just think about how many of the cigarette marketing strategies that I just spoke of you've seen used to market e-cigarettes. Short of not seeing a doctor using an e-cigarette, I think I've seen all of them. So the bottom line is that the industry does pay billions of dollars to find ways to market their products. The marketing is designed to make people believe the products are safe and fun and helpful and even a normal, quote unquote, part of our lives. And the marketing is geared towards people they feel that they can take advantage of. It's important that everyone, especially young people, are very cautious and think critically about what this industry is actually selling you. Because behind the flashy labels and the techie devices and the fun designs and the names of all of the thousands of fruit and candy flavored e-liquid, there is a much darker reality, and that includes addiction and unknown health risks and an industry that is interested in their profits, and they're not interested in people. Next slide, please. So moving away from the industry marketing, I did want to just point out a couple of current laws that exist around e-cigarettes. It is illegal under the Smoke-Free Ontario Act to supply tobacco products, e-cigarettes, or e-liquid to anyone under 19. This includes friends sharing products with each other, regardless of whether those people are underage or not. It also includes parents giving products to their kids. And it also includes privately trying to sell products to people, even if it's to a friend. So breaking that law could result in fines that start around $365. It is also illegal under the Smoke-Free Ontario Act to vape in public areas within 20 meters of school property, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that means that you basically have to be about 2 school bus lengths away from the edge of school property before vaping or smoking, for that matter. And breaking that law could result in a fine of about $305. Next slide, please. So I'm getting to the end of the presentation, but I did just want to say that if you are looking for more information about vaping or resources or anything along those lines, I would really encourage you to check out our website at nonexperiment.ca. So on the website, you will find more information about vaping and the health effects and the industry behind it. There's also a ton of ideas there about ways to generate discussions about vaping. There is a series of 3 videos that we've created on the website that are available to watch and download and share. And there's also our our Escape the Experiment game that is available for download there as well. Next slide, please. There's also a ton of downloadable resources on the website, things like announcements that can be read out in school, postcards to do locker blasts with. There's a few different print-ready posters that are available. There's a smoke and vape free pledge, just an example of some of the resources that are there. Next slide, please. And even though Not an Experiment .ca does primarily focus on preventing youth vaping, there is also a cessation resource tool there. So a quit smoke or a quit vaping resource tool. The tool will walk the person through a series of questions, and those questions will help to explore your motivation for quitting. It helps you to set a quit date and prepares people for dealing with what quitting is going to be like. So dealing with withdrawal symptoms, and identifies where and whom you can turn to for support. Once you complete the questionnaire, you just pop in your email address and you will be emailed the resource, and only the email and only the resource. We will not contact you in any way other than to send you the resource. And you can either download that resource or you can use it right from your phone. Next slide, please. Now, we do often get asked some questions about COVID-19 since that's a timely topic right now. So the website does also have some information about COVID and vaping. I won't go through them now, but that information is there if you have any questions related to COVID. We've tried to answer some of the more popular questions we often get asked. So that information is there as well. Next slide, please. So I just want to end by reading you our tagline, which is, understand the issues around vaping. Don't treat your health like an experiment. The long-term health effects of vaping are still unknown. And we just want you to be well informed in making the choices that you're going to make around vaping. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your time. There's my name and my contact information. If you want to get a hold of me for any purpose around Not an Experiment, I welcome you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. That was great. A lot of information there. I don't see any questions just at this point, but that doesn't mean that more won't come up during the presentation. What an eye-opener to see the fines and what they start at. And I didn't even realize that, e-vaping and stuff just 20 meters away from the school, that was 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's not just during school hours. So definitely some great information there. So thank you very much.